Racism is complicated. There's so much to learn, and we're all at very different places in the learning process. We all come to it from different places. It's really hard to talk about racism. And I want you to stop and think for a moment about how that means really, really different things to different people, depending on who's hearing me say it. It can be really hard to talk about racism, but we need to talk about racism. The time for pretending that it's not something that we have a part of, that time has passed. I'm Brian Brown, and this is my video series on structural racism in the United States for East Hampton Public Schools. Racism can be like a bad dream for white Americans. Wake up in the middle of the night, you've just seen something horrible. Rodney King laying on the ground, being beaten by several police officers with batons. Might be hard to get back to sleep. If you do sleep at all, it's not good sleep. You wake up the next day, you go to work, you go to school, something's a bit off. Somebody checks on you, hey, you okay? Oh man, I had the craziest dream last night, it was horrifying. Right? You might be off all day, might not have an appetite. Maybe even when you're going back to bed the next night, you're thinking, man, I hope I don't have a terrible dream like that again. But time passes. Eventually, you say to yourself, oh, this is just a dream. And you go back to life. And so then when James Byrd Jr. happens, Amadou Diallo, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, all of a sudden, you're like, these dreams, why do I keep having them? This is really interfering with my life. I used to have an enjoyable life, but I keep having these dreams, and it's really, but you can tell yourself it's not real. You can tell yourself that this isn't your life. When Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd by kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes in full view of video cameras, many Americans said, how could this happen? But people of color in America knew exactly how this could happen. These conversations are going to be hard, they're going to be heavy, but they're really, really important. Racism is our problem to fix, all of us. If we're going to fight against racism, first we have to understand it. So let's start with a quick definition of racism. A lot of people feel like they know what racism means. Normally I would say, don't get too hung up on exact definitions of things. Sometimes when people get too wound up about a definition, it really distracts from the conversation. But this is an important word for us to understand. Racism isn't just about bias. It's not just about somebody having an opinion about somebody else based on their race. Okay? That racial bias is a part of racism. All right? But there's an important element to racism, which is power. Okay? You can't be racist without being in a position of power. So, when people talk about racism in America, all right, traditionally, historically, always, in America, the people in power have been white men. All right, and we're going to look at this in great detail. All right, so the idea of racism has to do with white people discriminating against people of color. Okay, ideas of reverse racism and so on and so forth, that's bias. Again, I don't want to get too hung up in this, but what we're talking about here is we're talking about racism. We're talking about people in a position of power discriminating against, oppressing people of color. Okay? A quick example. All right? I know that most people disagree with me on this, but I don't like Tom Hanks. All right? I hear he's a wicked nice guy. I really, really want to like him. But when Tom Hanks's face is on the screen and noises come out of his mouth, I wish that wasn't happening. And I don't know why, and I know everyone loves him, so that's fine. You can write me off as a bad actor critic, okay? I don't have any power over Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks doesn't care that I don't like him, all right? I can be as biased against Tom Hanks as I want. It doesn't hurt him. All right? I'm not in a position to decide whether or not he gets to make a movie or make a living or borrow money to buy a mansion or whatever Tom Hanks does in his life. All right? Even if Tom Hanks showed up and I was hanging out with all my buddies and we decided we were going to be so rude to Tom Hanks, that might be really uncomfortable for Tom Hanks for a minute. Probably not. Who cares about us? All right? But maybe it is. Maybe I make Tom Hanks feel embarrassed. All right? But I don't have any power over Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks can walk away and say, well, that was weird. All right? People aren't usually rude to me like that. All right? Who's that guy? Who cares? I think I'll go buy a car to make myself feel better about it. All right? So that's the idea, right? Bias can make people feel uncomfortable. It can be bad and stuff like that. All right? But without that element of power, it's not even close to the same thing. You with me? All right. So what we're talking about here is structural racism. All right, so I'm not talking about individual instances of racism, although they're part of the structure. I'm talking about structural racism, okay? This is about the system in America, okay? This is about a system that is designed to benefit the powerful. Right? People in power have the ability to make the rules. They tend to make the rules in ways that benefit themselves, all right? We're going to look at how the system is structured specifically along racism, along racist bias. There are ways that it discriminates against other people, absolutely. Okay? The way that the system is set up, most people don't know they're participating in it. Okay, I'll talk about this more in a minute, but these videos aren't to make you feel bad about what you do or your beliefs or what you might have said or what you might not have known. All right. The reason that the system is so successful as it is because it's easy for people to deny that it exists, and people, very well-meaning people, all the time participate in the system and are unaware that they are helping the system along. The system is set up to function the way that it does, and it functions very well, unfortunately. Let me give you a little overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to start with some history stuff. We're going to talk about, we're going to start right with the end of slavery, end of the Civil War, a period called Reconstruction. And we're going to see what goes wrong in Reconstruction, and that's going to lead us to Jim Crow. Now, a lot of times when people think about racism in America, they think about Jim Crow. They think about the segregated South, and people not, being able to use the same restaurants and hotels and stuff like that, people not being able to vote. We'll talk about all that stuff. All right. I do want to say that this isn't this isn't like a Black history course. This isn't a history of the civil rights movement or anything like that. We're really looking at structural racism. All right. And that's going to be the focus. So it's going to be intense, and there's not going to be a lot of victories here. Because the system adapts, and that's the tricky part, but that's the part that we're trying to see, that I'm hoping that you can see, so that you can understand how stuff that happened 200 years ago is still affecting us today. Okay? After Jim Crow, after the mid-60s, when civil rights legislation is passed and stuff like that, all right, this is the era that we're in right now. And this is an era that Michelle Alexander referred to as the new Jim Crow. And the new Jim Crow, the new form of structural racism, has to do with mass incarceration. It has to do with the criminal justice system and things like that. And so we are going to spend some time looking at structural racism in mass incarceration and the criminal justice system. And we will, at the end, we'll look a little bit at the Black Lives Matter movement and sort of what that's been all about and what that's asking for. And hopefully we'll have a much better understanding of what people are talking about, what people are demanding and asking for. But I assure you, no progress has ever been made without people demanding it. All right? People in power set up the system to benefit them. They're not going to give that up unless people demand it. There's probably going to be some stuff here that's going to go against what you've always thought, what you might think now. All right? And, you know, it's going to be a little uncomfortable. We don't learn stuff if we don't push ourselves past our comfort level to some extent. All right? And I want you to think about where you, like, you know, we all feel like we know a lot of stuff, but like, where do we really learn that stuff from? All right? Usually it's just like some dude told us, right? So like, for example, I used to play in a band. I used to live in El Paso, Texas. I played in a band with this guy, Chet Woodward, right? And Chet was like, oh, we have to play Little Sister by Elvis. Got to play that song. It's an awesome song, all right? And he would always say this. He'd be like, it's the only song that Elvis ever wrote. Elvis never wrote any of his songs, but he wrote Little Sister. He used to talk about it all the time. We play it. It's a cool song. It's a cool little rockabilly song, right? Anyway, so, you know, Chet passed about a year ago, and I was thinking about Chet. I was thinking about that song, and I sort of Googled it. Elvis didn't write that song. Elvis, you know, so, you know, Chet's a cool guy. He was my friend. He was my bandmate. And Chet was legit, right? He was a drummer for Big Jack Johnson, huge blues player in Texas. He played with Skip Spence from the Moby Grape. All right, Chet's musical abilities were, you know, unquestionable. Right, but he was wrong about this thing. He always said it. This was back before the internet was a part of my life, so I couldn't Google it. I wouldn't have anyway. All right, but Little Sister was written by Jerome Felder and Mort Schumann. That's all there is to it. All right, so now I know that. I still love Chet. I still think of him when I hear the song. All right, but he was wrong about that thing. All right, so sometimes we just got to be open to learning new things, even if we learned it from somebody who we care about. Some disclaimers. All right, so a few things I want to say that, you know, about this video project in general, then I'll let you get to it. All right, first of all, you know, obvious statement. I'm a white guy. I can't speak for the experience of people of color. All right, I wouldn't try to. You know, I won't try to. That's not my job. It is really important that white people speak about this too, that we educate and talk about what we know, and we talk to each other. All right? It's not to imply that you're a white person, but maybe you are. Okay? Another disclaimer is that, you know, we're talking about civil rights here, and, you know, really the best way to approach civil rights is, you know, civil rights for all. And you know, I'm going to say right off the bat that this topic, the way that I've organized it, it's not nearly as intersectional as it could or probably should be. So I want to acknowledge that. I'll try to acknowledge other civil rights issues for other groups as they come up, but I'm going to just come right out and say I'm falling short on that. It's, you know, it's something I'm working on. Okay. Next thing I want to say, and I said it a little bit before, but this isn't about guilt. It's not about shame. I don't want to make people feel bad. I don't want to make people feel guilty because that shuts people down. It makes people defensive. It makes people lash out. All right. A lot of white people have really hard lives and stuff like that. All right. I understand that. Okay. This isn't about making you feel guilty. It's just about trying to understand that there is a system of structural racism in America, and it affects people, and people are calling out for our help, and they deserve our help. So let's learn about it. So this is about raising awareness. If you're new to learn about this stuff, welcome. Awesome. I'm really glad you're here. And I hope those of us who have been around a little longer or have been studying this stuff are also going to be welcoming. All right? We need everybody on board here. We need everybody trying to understand this, raise awareness about this. So let's not make people feel like, you know, afraid to say the wrong thing because they're just starting out here. Okay? Let's be open. With that in mind, I am open to trying to respond to questions in the comments and stuff like that. I understand what the comment section of YouTube can get like. So, you know, if it gets ridiculous, if you're being rude or whatever, you know, don't do that. But I will try to answer questions. If people have resources in mind that they think are good, feel free to suggest that in the comments as well. I'm going to teach a few lessons, and then I'll do a recap. And when I'm doing recaps, I'll try to answer questions along like that. We'll see how it goes. Okay. I also want to say that criminal justice isn't the only institution that's a part of structural racism. Not by a long shot. I am going to talk about economics and so on and so forth. But I also want to recognize that I'm an educator, and education is the biggest institution in the country. Everybody goes through education, and education is absolutely responsible for perpetuating structural racism. It totally is. All right, but the discussion really here, because we're talking about mass incarceration, because we're talking about the new Jim Crow, and because we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, we are going to be looking at criminal justice. All right, because I'm critical of the way that criminal justice has been run, doesn't mean that that I hate cops or that I think all cops are racist. In the same way that I don't hate teachers or think that all teachers are racist. Okay, but what I do think that we need is we need to look at our institutions, and you know, hopefully these lessons will help you be able to look at them with, you know, just a little more background. Okay. Lastly, again, because we're talking about criminal justice, and I know how discussions about that go, I understand that people are responsible for their own actions. Okay. But if you think that people start in the same place in this world, if you think that the playing field is level for everybody in this world, then I really, really hope you listen. Okay? I'm really glad you're here. Let's get to it. So thank you very much. Check out lesson 1.